Hey guys, this is John, and I'm playing BunkerBuster in the 15-minute pool on ICC. Let's play a Caro-Kann against BunkerBuster. I'm recording this on Friday, almost 6 o'clock p.m. He plays the fantasy variation, f3. I know there's a couple different approaches against this line, so white just plays to reinforce e4. There's taking on e4 and then playing e5, but I'm going to play this move. This is a funky move. Honestly, like, almost the only thing I know about this move is that it's possible and that it gets played. So we're going to be on our own from here. Knight c3 makes sense. It attacks d5. I think the principal idea of queen b6 is to keep the dark square bishop from developing so easily. I would assume pawn e6 is the move, but are there other moves? Maybe. Like, what about taking on e4 and then playing e5? Looks possible, because e6 locks in the light square bishop. And unless I have a clear plan of how to get that piece out, I'm hesitant to go into that. Knight f6, he can just play e5. So it seems like it's between taking on e4 and playing e6. Bishop e6 is too awkward. So if I take, he takes, e5. If they take, I would assume a move like bishop c5 gives me ample compensation for the pawn. Well, let's take a chance on this one. Maybe he'll even take back with the knight. I suspect pawn takes, but I'm still going to play that e5 move. Let's check BunkerBuster's stats. Peak rating of 2,086. About 1,500 15-minute games played. So they do take with the knight. Now, this bears a resemblance to the mainline Caro-Kann with knight c3 on move 3, and then d takes e4, knight takes, with the exception that I played queen b6 and they played f3. Off the top of my head, I have no idea who that benefits. I could play bishop f5, or I could play knight d7. Knight d7 intends to play knight gf6, but I wonder if knight d7, queen e2 is okay for them. I can always play e6 then, but it might be the case that I have to move my queen back in order to develop my light square bishop, like queen c7, b6, bishop b7. I could also just play knight f6 right now. Maybe I should do that. Knight f6, they take. I can take back either pawn. Probably g takes. All right, we'll play for quick development. How about that? I think all of the moves I just looked at, knight d7, bishop f5, or the one I played, knight f6, all have some merit. I'll pre-move this. Ironically, I could get a structure that, if you watch my channel a lot, you'll see that I play frequently, especially in Bullet, which is this structure with g takes f6. And I get that a lot because I play the Scandinavian. And in Bullet, I play the Scandinavian almost exclusively against e4. And this structure can happen a lot out of that opening. He seems hesitant to take. He probably should, though. Plays c3 instead. So he's giving me a chance to change my mind about accepting double pawns. I could play knight bd7 if I was truly scared of it. But I think I'll probably just play bishop f5. Bishop f5, what if he plays bishop d3? Could also take on e4 and then play that e5 move again. I don't want to give him a huge center, though. So if bishop f5, bishop d3, he'd be threatening knight takes f6, then winning my piece on f5. So it almost compels me to take or play bishop back to g6, which looks a little weird in this position. Looking again at knight takes e4. So knight takes e4, pawn takes, let's say e5, knight f3, bishop g4. What do we think about that? They have a nice center. What about bishop e6? Bishop e6, let's say bishop d3, and then knight bd7. The idea of bishop e6 would be to avoid the x-ray with the bishop on d3 and my bishop on f5, but it seems artificial. I mean, they might be able to play knight g5 then. Yeah, I'm not a big fan of that move. I'm actually going to play this move. I know it blocks in my light square bishop, but I'm really against taking on e4 now that I've committed to this development scheme. And I think they want that. They want me to capture it so they can get their knight to f3. It's natural square. So the plan I'm going to go with, if allowed, is to play g6, bishop g7, castle short, and then maybe a timely e5 to strike back at their center. The one thing that could derail my plan is if they play queen e2. So let's say g6, queen e2, they'd be threatening knight into d6. Then again, I could play g6, queen e2, queen c7 if I want. Let's say knight h3. Maybe I take on e4 then. All right, I'm going to do it. It looks interesting, and I'll have play if that actually occurs, the queen e2 move. I'm not sure how thrilled they are to play that when their knight is lacking squares. It could go through h3, I suppose. It's not the end of the world. My short-term goal is simply to castle. Bishop g7, castle short. Then I'll be looking at ways to get this light square bishop out or attack in the center. I know this variation can produce some pretty unique positions. The f3 variation. Yeah, knight e2, that's sort of an expected move. Just do this as planned. He's probably going to castle. After castles, I could play e5 directly, but I'll probably castle myself. Keep e5 in reserve. The attack on the b2 pawn will slow them down a bit, I think, because let's say they castle and I castle. If they were to develop that bishop, I could snatch that pawn on b2. They have basically rook b1 as a single tempo gaining move, but then queen a3, and it looks like a healthy pawn to me. I wouldn't be surprised to see them play queen c2 or queen b3 right now. Maybe a move like king h1 to escape the pin of the d-pawn on the long diagonal. Yeah, king h1. Makes a lot of sense. Maybe e5 now. Trying to take and open lines in the middle. I'm not fearful of opening lines in the center because it looks like I'm going to get plenty of play out of it. It does allow their knight into d6, but I can take... Doesn't do much damage. That's a bad bishop anyways. Let's do it. I doubt they take this pawn, because if they take, I get to jump my knight in directly. And then the diagonal for the bishop's open. I'm attacking d3. Maybe I could go rook d8 after that. So unlikely they capture on e5. I think, again, they'll play some move to defend b2. Unless they want to get aggressive with bishop g5, intending something like queen takes b2, d takes e5, and whereupon I can't play knight takes e5 because I would lose a piece on f6. But if bishop g5, I can always capture on d4 or e4 first before taking that pawn on b2. Yeah, I think good chance they slow down and try to defend that pawn now. Let's pre-move this just in case, but I doubt they capture. Hope you guys are having a good weekend. I don't have any major plans. Just a reminder that Mother's Day, at least in the US, is on Sunday. So make sure to, at the very least, call your mother if you're not in the same city, but try to get together with your mother. That's ideal. Okay, so they take on f6, and bishop takes should be played. If I take with a knight, then d takes e5, wins a pawn for them, so bishop takes must be played. They can play the tempo move, bishop to h6. Rook e8 or bishop g7 would be my reply. I'm still hitting b2. If bishop h6, do I want the dark square bishops on or off the board? That's an important question. Part of me just wants to play rook e8 immediately, but this is a bishop that is going to restrict my king, and it'll be a nuisance. Maybe rook e8. Well, I'm going to play rook e8 first, because I feel like I want my rook on the e-file anyways, and maybe I can decide later if I want to play bishop g7. In other words, I don't think I'm giving anything up by playing rook e8 first. It's still a useful move, so I can wait to determine whether that exchange of dark square bishops helps or hurts me. Definitely I don't want this piece sticking here forever, but in a middle game it could be out of play on h6. If it started creating like mating threats for him, then I'd want to exchange it, but for now I'm not too threatened by it. Also, I'm enticed by the prospect of taking on d4 and potentially forcing them to accept an isolated pawn with c takes d4. I suppose they could play knight takes d4 too, so we'll see. Gambit move, bishop c4. So they're saying go ahead and take b2 and see what happens. Well, I know my king is in a crossfire from the bishops, but if I take b2, let's say they play rook b1, I play queen a3, how are they really going to hurt me? I mean, is there anything devastating that I'm like overlooking here? Because I don't see the danger, at least not right now. In other words, I don't believe you, BunkerBuster. All right. Show me what you got. He's got the attack against f7, but as long as the pressure cannot be increased, then I'm all right. And I think I have ways to unwind too, like I could maybe play knight b6, hit the light square bishop. If needed, my queen can come back to e7. Probably they want to play knight g3 and try to get into e4. I consider that move. I thought I would just play knight g3, bishop back to g7. Yeah, that should be okay. Knight g3 leaves the pawn weak, but I don't want to play... Maybe I could play queen takes c3, actually, because this bishop is defended. So in the event of knight e4 attacking my queen, I could chop on c4, and it should be okay. Okay, so this one, what about knight b6? What are you going to do against that move? I can understand he wants me to take so he can take with his queen and add another attacker to f7. But what about knight b6? That hits your bishop. If you move it back, I take. Looks pretty good for me. Could play queen c5 too. That attacks the bishop and also the pawn. But knight b6 is more effective. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe he'll get really bold and sacrifice the exchange on b6. Doubtful. Ooh, now I have bishop f5 enabled. Developing the light square bishop, hitting the rook. I could do that in the case of bishop b3. I could play bishop f5, tempo gaining move. They could take on c6, maybe. Very least I could take back, though. B takes c6. I think he got optimistic with bishop c4 a few moves ago. Bishop c4 on move 13. Probably should have just played like rook b1 or queen c2, something like that, to defend b2. I don't want to jinx myself and call it too early, but it looks like he might have miscalculated. So his idea with taking is that if I take on c4, he takes b7. If I take c4, he takes b7. I take with my bishop. He gets this rook in. Yeah, there's a little bit of pressure there. So probably I should just recapture. Yeah, there's no rush. If bishop b3, I have the bishop f5 move. That's helpful. Gain time. And then rook a d8, perhaps, after that. Bishop takes f7 is still not a problem. We just take with our king. There's no queen b3 or anything. Well, he's trying to bust my bunker right now, but it's not working too well. My king is nice and snug in the fallout shelter. He's going to need some nuclear warheads to get at that king. These half measures, pawns and such, are not going to do the trick. So bishop f5. I could play bishop a6 too. But I think bishop f5. If bishop f5, rook c1, rook a d8, my pieces are all coming nicely to the middle. You can play queen e1 and then go for something maybe having to do with knight e4. In that sense, bishop a6 seems pretty good. I don't know, though. Both moves have their merit. Let's just choose one. It's really tough to say which one's better right now, bishop a6 or bishop f5. My only fear with bishop f5, it gains a tempo on the rook, but it'll probably lose a tempo when he plays knight g3. Because I don't want to allow knight takes f5. So I have mixed feelings. Like, part of my plan is to drop the bishop back to e6 very soon and just offer a trade of the light square bishops. So we'll see. I predict the game goes rook c1, rook a d8, queen e1, and then I'll have to decide. Like bishop g7 could be played, bishop e6 again. Makes sense. It'll probably go something along those lines. We've done an okay job of managing the time this game. I think we made quick defensive decisions, practical decisions, and we didn't stress too much about the exact details. Okay, so he's going all in. He's allowing me to take on b1, I guess in hopes of getting at f7 is the argument he's making. Do I play rook a d8 first before taking the rook, or do I even take the rook at all? Maybe I can play rook a d8, queen e1, and then take on f4, sort of forcing him into the pin. Because I really doubt he would play rook a d8, queen c1. That avoids the loss of the exchange, but I just doubt he does that. If I take on b1, I think his plan is to take on e5, in fact. Okay, so let's do this first. Useful tempo gaining move. And if queen e1, I have half of mine just to play e takes f4. I just leave that rook sitting on b1 for the moment. I don't have to get greedy and take. Yeah, because I think clearly his idea is if bishop takes b1, he's going to reply with f takes e5, hitting my bishop. And if my bishop were to take, there's bad things happening on f7. Surprisingly, yeah, he offers the exchange. So we can trade and go into an endgame, up a pawn. Yeah, we'll do it. He's going to take it with his rook. So if I take f4, I'm hitting his knight on e2, but he has knight takes in reply. Rook d2 is kind of tempting here, but he can take on e5, and he has a discovered attack on my rook. e4 is a move I could play. e4 is kind of nice because it blocks his dark square bishop off. He can go knight g3 and try to take on f5, but that might just serve to strengthen my structure. I can play knight d5. Bishop d3 is another option. Bishop d3 he takes on e5, I think, though. Just bishop g7 is interesting. Okay, let's do e4. Keeps the f file closed. That's a main reason for playing this move. Also, I have my bishop attacking c3 now, so if his knight leaves the defense of that pawn, like let's say knight g3, I think knight d5 is just a good reply. Attacking c3, maybe I can get into e3 and then over to g4 even, attack the bishop on h6. This looks like a good move to handle the position. And next I'll be looking at moves like rook d2 if the knight is still there, knight d5 as I mentioned, maybe bishop g7. You could try h3, attempting to play g4. It's a slow plan, though. And worst comes to worst, I just move this bishop back like to c8, not blocking any of my rooks. Yeah, it's an unpleasant move for him to meet. So he does play h3. I can go rook d2. He'll probably just defend the knight, though. He probably wouldn't play rook d2, knight g3, because that defeats the purpose of h3, trying to go g4. Rook d2, let's say, I don't know, rook ce1, bishop h4, he has g3. Nothing doing there. Rook d2 seems useful, however. I just like that move. It gains tempo. Could also play e3, intending like g4 and then a check on e4 or bishop d3. Let's do rook d2 first. Keep it simple. How are you going to defend? You can go knight d4. Place that instead. It's kind of what I anticipated. Knight d5 maybe? Again, g4 is coming. Maybe e4. e4, knight d4. Nah, that's nothing. Okay, we'll go e3. Just trying to create some scope for my light square bishop with this move. He lashes out. Okay, so I can check and then play bishop to h4. Yeah.
Check.
That's the best way to go about this, because now he has to play king g1. He's not going to want to walk into the pin. And I have this move, which looks pretty murderous. Attacking the rook, which is in turn defending the knight. And if he doesn't move the rook, I just take. I can also throw in bishop f2 if I want, maybe. It could be really evil to play like bishop f2, king f1, and then bishop d3. And he can scarcely lift a finger then. I think he'll probably play a move like knight d4 and just pitch the exchange and try something. But actually, if knight d4, there's rook g2 check even. Or take the rook first and then rook g2 check. The only thing bad about parting with the dark square bishop is this bishop on h6 is probably going to stick around and attempt to create mating threats around my king. Yeah, knight d4. Okay, so can I throw in bishop f2 or rook g2 first? It'd be nice to play rook g2, king f1, bishop d3, but he takes my rook then. What if I go rook g2, king f1, rook h2, threatening rook h1? You can take on e3, I check. That wins a whole rook. Okay, let's do that first.
Check.
He's in bad shape. King f1. For rook f2, he just goes back. But rook h2 looks murderous. Yeah, this is really ugly. The bishops are more powerful in coordination with the rook rather than cashing in on e1 quite yet. Just trying to extract some more value from my attacking position. It's also nice to do this when the time is getting low. Stay on the attack rather than simplify. Because now he's got to do something, I don't know, really awkward to avoid checkmate. Actually, like, what am I threatening right now? Because if I check, he just runs away. But that move in turn loses to this.
Check.
I just go take his rook on c1. That was kind of a weird position because I don't think I was actually threatening anything direct. But it was still hard for him to find a move. Yeah, he resigned. I mean, I am threatening like to take on h3 or again take on e1. But there's nothing immediately winning if I have another move. Fortunately, he can't do anything with his minor pieces, really. I'm covering c6 as well. Okay, let's have a look at that one. So a Caro-Kann with f3, and I play this queen b6 move. He goes knight c3. Let's turn on the engine right here. I don't know the theory whatsoever in this position. I took on e4. The engine was also saying e6 and was saying e5 for a moment too, which is a attractive looking move. If he takes bishop c5, I was looking at some forms of this pawn sacrifice where the queen and bishop get to terrorize white's dark squares. I'm not sure about that. Knight a4, it looks complicated. Bishop f2,
Check.
king e2, queen d4, knight h3. Yeah, your guess is as good as mine about what's going on now. So take... I wonder why this line is called the fantasy variation. There must be some story behind that. So knight f6 and then c3. Yeah, if I were him, I would have considered taking. I was going to take with the g-pawn, but taking with the e-pawn makes sense as well. And then I was going to try to follow a Scandinavian development path, like bishop f5, e6, knight d7, maybe castle queenside. I'm not sure if the presence of the pawn on f3 is good or bad for him. My default answer would be bad, but maybe he can do something like knight e2, and then if bishop f5, maybe knight g3 here, and then like rush his f for his h-pawns, trying to go up and attack my bishop on f5 or h5. Instead, he plays c3. I went knight bd7. I didn't like bishop f5, bishop d3, threatening knight takes f6 and winning this bishop. It just didn't seem quite right. I guess I could play bishop g6 and defend that piece, but I'm happy with what I played. Knight bd7, goes bishop d3. Maybe bishop c4 is more threatening. Because then at g6, I suspect something like knight g5 or queen e2 first. Attacking f7 before I'm coordinated could be good. Yeah, e6, knight e2. I'd like to avoid this pawn structure if I could. I'm kind of weak around the dark squares. But he played bishop d3. I went g6. Maybe queen e2 is the best at this point. Threatening knight d6.
Check.
So I can't just smoothly complete my development. Then I'd have to play king f8, and he can bring his knight back. I'm not able to castle. Definitely white's better. So queen e2 would be the move I would be fearful of here. I think I was planning on playing queen c7 against that. But then knight h3, trying to go bishop f4 and renew the threat. What did I have in mind against this? I think maybe just take on e4, but then he gets to take with the f-pawn, which is the scenario I was trying to avoid all along. Yeah, so missed opportunity with queen e2 for him. That could have been annoying. So he went knight e2, bishop g7, castle, castle, king h1, and now e5, striking back at the center. I felt pretty confident now.
Check.
He took on f6. I took with the bishop to keep e5 defended. Bishop h6. So I played the flexible move rook e8, leaving open the question of whether I'll offer to exchange dark square bishops. I just don't think it's necessary yet to play bishop g7. So I'm attacking b2, and I think he should just defend it now. Like I was saying, rook b1 or queen c2, something along those lines. I can take on d4 then. Queen d2 the engine likes, yeah. Also makes sense. I would probably take, and then it depends which way he took back. If he took it the knight, I doubt I would try to win a pawn like this because the dark squares around my king being so weak, I bet he has compensation. So I probably would play a knight move like knight e5, knight c5, maybe knight f8. Probably knight c5, to be honest. The engine likes c5, pawn c5. Knight b3, knight e5. And it likes black a tiny bit. I do think I'm out of the woods at this point, after he had missed that queen e2 resource. Now my position is comfortable. So bishop c4, and I took on b2. I like pawns. I like grabbing pawns, and if I suspect that my opponent doesn't have sufficient attacking resources, I'm completely fine in defending a position. I think it's worth it a lot of times. Yeah, this was just not a good pawn sacrifice by him. He needs more follow-up threats rather than simply like rook b1, and that's it. He needs more diverse ways to attack my king rather than just having two bishops looking threatening. Like if his knight was poised to go into e4 and maybe f4 was a bigger threat, then I could see why queen takes b2 might not be a good idea. But as played, he doesn't have enough firepower. Yeah, d5 didn't help either. Not sure what he should do. I was speculating about knight g3 maybe, trying to come to e4. But if worse comes to worse, I think I could always just drop the bishop back. Maybe he has some comp then, but he needs to do something like that. Like get the knight involved rather than pushing a center pawn. Even here, knight d6 does look like a good idea. And if knight e4, just drop this back, I suppose. Again, I'm attacking their bishop, and hopefully I can get mine out soon. So he went d5, knight b6 is a nice retort. Take on c6. So his idea was knight takes c4, c takes b7, gaining the material back, but I can just recapture. Bishop b3. Here I was trying to decide between bishop f5 and bishop a6. I just went with the more obvious one. And then he played f4. Yeah, the computer just wants to grab on b1. Nothing surprising there. It doesn't believe in white's attack. So what if that and then take on e5? This is just bad for some reason. Bishop takes a2. Okay, trying to get rid of the light square bishop. That is a pretty good move. Bishop takes, queen takes. He can't even take with a pawn because I win e2. So rook takes, and I assume rook takes e5. Again, there's not enough ammo that can be fired against my king. He's running out of bullets. Okay, so bishop takes b1 was just a cold-blooded way to refute it. This is more flash than anything. After bishop takes a2. I played another tempo gainer, also looks plenty good. Queen c1, we swapped. So you always feel a little bit more comfortable when you're ahead a pawn and the queens come off the board, because then you know that white's strongest piece can't create problems for you. Here I played e4. I like this move. It opens the dark square bishop. It makes his dark square bishop less relevant because there's no pawn tension here, so it won't be eyeing like that d2 square. I have in mind the follow-up knight d5 attacking c3. So he played h3. I infiltrated. Rook here. Yep, e3. The engine likes it. And g4 is overreaching, but it's pretty tough anyways. Yeah, this is indecisive territory for black. It has been for a little bit now. So g4,
check.
I gave it check. Yeah, and then bishop h4. His coordination is too poor. He's down material, and his king is weak. Knight d4.
Check.
So I gave a check and then played rook to h2. This might have been a bit fancy, I don't know. But he really almost has no moves. I mean, as you saw, rook takes e3, just
Check.
lost to rook h1. But even though I'm not threatening much, other than taking here or taking here, what can he really play? c5 is a threat. I saw the computer like that a couple moves back. It was saying c5 right at this juncture, I think. Because the knight is lacking squares. I suppose if it comes to b5, then I can
Check.
do this, and then what, bishop d3?
Check.
Yeah, and pick up the knight. At the very least, actually, I also win the rook.
Check.
So everything works for black, as long as I don't blunder. Yeah, and he took
Check.
here, and now he's losing the rook straight up, so he resigned. Okay, well, I think it started falling apart for white when they gambited that pawn. But they played knight e2 a bit routinely in the opening. They needed to play queen e2. That would have kept the pressure on. The position was pretty unique. We were both kind of feeling our way through it, I think. But after we get castle and black plays e5, I think I'm close to equalizing.
Check.
And his decision to play bishop c4 was, in retrospect, a poor choice. So when you sacrifice even just a pawn for the initiative, it's so helpful when your threats can build on top of each other. Like, sacrificing a pawn for a single threat or tempo gaining move is usually not worth it. You want a cascade of threats, if possible. You want multiple ways to follow up. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'll be back tomorrow with another standard game. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.